Hello, this week is Parshas BeMidbar, the beginning of the fourth book of the five, and I'd like to devote some time to exploring the purpose of this book. Now, the Ramban, writing in the mid-13th century, is convinced that the Torah is a cogent, cohesive whole, and there is a seamless transition between one book and the next. So before looking at what the Ramban says in his introduction to BeMidbar, let's have a brief recap of what he said for the transitions for the other books. Bereshis, the book of Genesis, is the story of a family. It's a family who build a relationship with God, and God descends, as it were, on their homes. In the book of Shemos, Exodus, this is replicated at a national macrocosmic level, in which the Jewish people, the Israelites, find an identity through slavery, Exodus, revelation, and by building a Mishkan, which becomes their home on which God's presence rests, replicating the private experience at the end of the book of Bereshis. And now we move to Vayikra, which we finished reading last week. The book of Vayikra is really about how to maintain Sinaitic inspiration. What do you do with this Mishkan? How do you keep people in that mode of inspiration? And there are various rules about reconnecting and continuing a relationship with God, many of which are difficult to understand for us today. And that brings us to the book of BeMidbar. What is the book of BeMidbar about? So the Ramban helpfully says as follows: Hischil atol l'sadeh b'sefer hazeh hamitzvos nitztavu be'inyan ohel moed. Now, the book begins to lay out the mitzvahs that were instructed for the ohel moed. The ohel moed is the Mishkan, the temporary structure around which they lived. It's a rule book for living in the presence of the Mishkan. This book, any rules are entirely focused on the context. They're just for that generation in the desert and not for any further. Oh, and there's some narratives too. The miracles that happen to them, conveniently missing out the Shalach and Korach, the spies and the Korach rebellions. Mitzvahs Norgos Ladoros, and there are no mitzvahs in this book which will be relevant for other subsequent generations, apart from a few which began in Vayikra and are continued here. So if the Torah is to be a guide for all eternity for the Jewish people, why is BeMidbar included? It's a whole book of content which is only about the generation of the desert and not beyond. Now there's a midrash at the beginning of BeMidbar which I think is asking this question. And it casts the Jewish people standing at Mount Sinai, waiting for God to appear to reveal the Torah to them. And as God descends, he comes with a retinue of thousands of angels, all in a particular formation. And there's a certain formation, a certain way of being that they find very attractive. And they pray, as it were, to God through the Midrash, God, we would like to replicate this. And God says, you will have an opportunity. Wait till the book of BeMidbar. BeMidbar, our Parsha, begins. The first long chapter is a list of all of the tribes, how many there are in each tribe. Then that is repeated in the very long second chapter, where those tribes are then allocated to a degel, a flag encampment. 4 flag encampments, each of 3 tribes, around the Mishkan. And this, says the Midrash, enables the Jewish people to replicate the appearance of the angels around God, the Jewish people around the Mishkan, replicating the angels around God. This, I believe, conveys a profound idea. We're supposed to read the book of BeMidbar not as a rule book, but as a role book. Because there are going to be families, communities, tribes, flag encampments, groups, each with their own aspiration, each identity, each colour, as it were, each flag. Yet there's a central focus. They're not just doing their own thing, there is a central focus. As Rabbi Kamenetsky, writing in the mid-20th century, put it, these groupings, tribal boundaries, flag encampments, would quite naturally bespeak different approaches, aspirations, but also discord, pulling in different directions, particularly when their needs are in conflict with one another. And this, I believe, explains why, if you look in the second chapter of our Parsha, when we learn about the flag encampments with the Mishkan in the middle, the Mishkan is not called Mishkan Tabernacle, it's called Ohel Moed. Ohel Moed is another name, but it means the tent of meeting, the place of focus, the way in which there is a shared identity, Once there's a shared identity, those disparate identities expressed through tribal loyalties and flag loyalties need not matter. This is the purpose, I think, of the book of BeMidbar. As I said, it's not rules but roles. Our community, the Jewish community, is disparate, complex, and actually that's wonderful. Each group must protect, preserve and promote its own identity, its communal customs, its approach, even its willingness to go into battle appropriately and in the right way with other groups if they feel they are not sharing the central aspiration. Yet that central goal bespeaks a mature Jewish community where there's a respect for individuality, style, character, while still devoted to a common cause. And that common cause is to serve God and implement his extraordinary program called the Torah for the radical development of humanity. As Shavuos approaches, and by the way, BeMidbar is always read soon before Shavuos, there are two additional brief sources that come to mind which are apparently in conflict with one another. One, Ki ish echad b'lev echad, or every rabbi quotes it, the Jewish people stood at Mount Sinai with one heart, as though they had one aspiration. Yet there's another midrash which says that without each tribe, without each degel flag encampment, without each group, the Torah could not have been given. The two are not in conflict, because that is the beauty of Parshas BeMidbar. It shows us how to live in a community where there is respect for individuality, an acknowledgement of different identities, yet with a shared super identity. And every year, respecting those two separate ways of thinking, communal focus, yet with individuality, is the prerequisite for revelation. It was a prerequisite at Sinai, and it's a prerequisite for receiving the Torah this Shavuos as well. Good Shabbos and sei gesund und stark.